welcome everybody who is joining the session. And I will ask to, of course, to use the chat room of the session for everybody. And we have Victoria wishing us good morning, and any questions, anything from the attendees, hopefully we will see it there. Thank you, of course, to the Impact 17 for this interesting forum for discussions, I would say. Research, as the research platform of EU Business School, is one of the co-hosts that I am representing here. I'm a lecturer at EU Business School and the managing editor of the ONResearch journal. So I will also invite all the attendees to check out onresearch.ch. And yes, let's move to our session. So for the guests, here with me, we have Sille Krukow, who is a behavioral expert and the founder of Krukow Behavioral Design. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And David Lais, who is the serial entrepreneur and the founder of several innovative startups and the CEO currently of the latest one, which is, David, if you can correct me, my German is not good.
So it's called the Organisation für nachhaltigen Konsum, and I think the easiest translation is Organization for Sustainable Consumption, which is a non-for-profit organization out of Berlin.
Well, that's interesting, considering you have a lot of different other startups more on the tech and financial side, from what I read.
Yeah, correct. So I started very young, in the age of 16, with my first company. It was actually something nothing related to payments. We had a little social network for friends that somehow grew. We still don't know how. And we managed to sell it at some point. Not one of those big exits, but it was great for us. Just turning 18, being able to afford the first car was a nice add-on to it. But over that time, I stumbled into payments. And since then, I'm basically kind of stuck with the payments industry. Started in acquiring, meaning card acceptance, and later on moved into issuing. So card issuing kind of related. And roughly 5 years ago, I moved into the topic of sustainability. And yeah, but shall we just jump into the introduction, or this will take over the channel? So
No, I think it's interesting to see where you're coming from, because we have two very different backgrounds here between the two of you. If I'm not mistaken, Sille, you're coming from a very different perspective with the behavioral science and the visual design, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you can frame it like that. Basically, I've been working for the past 15 years together with scientists within cognitive psychology and behavioral economics. I have a master's in visual communication design. So in our company, what we do is we work a lot with international brands, especially consumer brands, on how to facilitate sustainable consumption, whether it has to do with energy or products or whatever. So on the B2C side, but we also work with business to business and optimizing processes and yeah, all kinds of work.
Can
well, as I said, different perspectives. Sorry, David. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted. Can you elaborate what this looks like on a B2C product? Because I'm just really curious.
Mm-hmm. So every time you go into a supermarket, your choices have been designed. A lot of small cognitive triggers, such as yellow stickers or a scent of something, nudges you or guides you towards a specific selection of products. Mm-hmm. And they are completely designed. So what we do is companies hire us to figure out what cognitive triggers to design when making sure that we facilitate sustainable consumption. So that can, for example, be creating a framework on how to place your products in a store so that the sustainable products become the most attractive ones, or how to guide people towards litter bins in public spaces, or ensuring public health in schools. For example, we work a lot right now in the Middle East where we look at schools, for example. How do we guide children to make more healthier eating choices on a daily basis? So it is really figuring out how do we design our surroundings and environments, whether it's digital or analog, to facilitate a specific set of choices.
I assume this has been changed on the topic of sustainability. So I could imagine that, you know, I don't know, 10 years ago, it was more like food has to be, what's the right way to say, like clean, it has to be straightforward. It's more like into processed food and everything has to be wrapped nicely, et cetera, so it gets my attention. And I think with sustainability, it becomes this little twist of, you know, I rather look for a paper-based packaging than for plastic, because I kind of a consumer understood plastic is bad for the environment. So I'm rather looking for something that is eco-friendly wrapped. Is that of the kind of discussions we will have?
It could be, but actually what we find is that a lot of the times when you ask consumers, do you want to have, you know, would you choose a product that looks really sustainable, that is wrapped in paper or does not have any wrapping? They're going to say yes. But what we see in reality is that there's a huge gap. They're always going to go for the ones wrapped in plastic with a yellow sticker saying on sale.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of figuring out, okay, it's really nice that we think that we're going to choose a sustainable choice, but there's a huge gap.
Yeah.
So we don't create very sexy looking solutions. We create the exact cognitive triggers that's going to make sure that you choose a sustainable product. And that might mean to down dressing the sustainable product to make it look more ordinary or to make it look like it's on sale.
Right.
So we are imitating the unhealthy choices just to make sure that we actually make healthy choices, if it makes sense. So we very rarely get to do very sustainable looking designs, because that is not what's needed when it comes to sustainable decisions, we find anyway.
Interesting. How do you ensure it's a sustainable product? So is it part of your policies to making sure you're not tapping into greenwashing because that's the best paying clients, or is it because it's consumer nudging, right? And I love the advert industry, not because I'm a particular fan of it, because I'm so fascinated of all of those psychology triggers that they use and tracking and measurement. And I'm always amazed, you know, sending a product via WhatsApp to my wife and saying, you know what, this is maybe good for our baby, and knowing 5 minutes later it will show up in their Instagram feed is mind-blowing, scaring, and everything at the same time. It's like, okay, how do we ensure that it's actually a sustainable product and it's not just look like it's a sustainable product?
And it's actually the question that is also asked in the chat: how do you define a sustainable product?
Yeah.
Well, we have different ways of defining it, and we basically go through the different products that we look at for each client. Like currently, for example, or let me give you a prior case that we worked on. We worked quite a bit with Heineken globally, looking at how to reduce drink driving. And that would typically be that kind of challenge that we would face. And here we move into bar environments, and we redesign bar environments in ways that we increase the odds of drivers leaving their car key at the entrance area or taking a taxi instead. So it's very rarely about selling actual products, because in that case, for example, we don't look at increasing sales of Heineken products. We simply make sure that people don't drink and drive. So when we move into a space, let's say we work for a global fashion retailer as well. And here we look at, you know, how do we get employees that sign up to a talent program to complete their program? So the whole point of working with applied behavioral science, in our point of view, is looking at the end user and figuring out what intentions do they have, what are their long-term goals, and how can we facilitate that change. It's not our job to sell any products. It's our job to make sure that the individual becomes successful at reaching their long-term goals. So we are very rarely asked to increase a specific product. It's more looking at, you know, how do we facilitate these kind of target behaviors for a specific group of people. So we look at what are the basic intentions and long-term goals of that group of people. So we put a lot of effort into making sure that we map that to begin with. What do they want to be successful with within sustainability? And how can we facilitate that? So it's, of course, using some of the same solution strategies as advertising does, but it's with a completely different perspective. It's figuring out how do we facilitate the long-term goals of the end user. That does very rarely has to do with sales or, yeah. Does it make sense?
Kind of. I'm still trying to put my head around it, to be honest. But I mean, ultimately, if you work with a company like Heineken, I mean, what's their goal? Obviously, they have a kind of a hidden agenda, I guess, behind the don't drink and drive agenda, right? It's like, I mean, I heard a lot of good stuff about them, also in terms of sustainability. So I don't want to put them into a corner where seriously have no idea how good or bad they are, but. I could imagine that there is an agenda behind it. There's an agenda by saying, you know, we're a good brand and we take care of you. And, you know, it's all about brand building. It's about brand awareness. And obviously sustainability is a topic that is well received by the public right now. And but what's the agenda? Is it really Heineken for the beer for the better world, or is it just the message they want to get across and helping you know what, we send you a taxi if you're drunk, it's fine, we will take care of you so you can drink tomorrow again. I don't know.
They don't.
They do.
But yeah, no, I completely get what you mean. So basically, what we have to understand is that 90% of our decisions, whether they are made online or offline, are controlled by our surroundings in the moment of choice. This means that the choice architects of this world are the global consumer brands. They control our everyday choices 100% almost. So if we want to make a difference and lead people towards sustainable everyday decisions, we got to start collaborating with these partners. Definitely.
I agree.
So of course, Heineken is going to have a brand objective as well. They are using our pilots to communicate around their CSR strategies. But to me, what's important, and I mean, we are a private organization, so we completely choose our clients ourselves. But we deliver on the sustainability targets. And because we create measurable behavioral impact, what's important for us is that we would never engage in a project that would not result in a measurable change in behavior. We don't care about what consumers think about a brand, what they feel about how they are behaving, because we simply know that it does not reflect on behavior. So we would always look at, if we go into a project, we would only look at how can we facilitate measurable impact. So how can we measurably reduce drink driving? And to me, it's important to work with the companies that has the bigger impact on the world. And since Heineken work in more than 30 markets, that's why it's important for us to work with them as well.
Yeah.
As long as we get to create a measurable impact. So it's, of course, there's always going to be an agenda that has to do with business. But sustainability, in my eyes, is also a matter of turning business around and figure out how can we make it profitable to lead sustainable consumption.
Fully agree. Yeah, we have to work with the leading brands because, as you said, they are having the major impact. And but it's very interesting.
But how many brands are ready to work with the companies like yours or any other companies that are working towards this sustainable consumption? What's on your experience, do you think? Is it really most of the brands are ready for this shift or not?
Definitely. I mean, we work with some of the biggest consumption brands in the world, and we are part of different membership organizations that has all these brands as members as well. So it's our experience that they're definitely ready to do it. They're looking for efficient tools on how to get there, but of course also business viable tools, because it is a business as well. So it's a matter of figuring out, well, how do we do it? The good intention is there, but the tools are lacking, and the good case, best case practices are lacking as well. That's our experience as well.
Yeah.
Sure. And maybe what kind of tools you think that would help different brands and companies?
Me?
Any of you, David, maybe you can step in with your opinion on specifically on some brands that you have an experience, or what kind of tools non-for-profit companies like yours or Sille's could offer to the big brands?
I mean, so we're in a niche space, right? So we're not really there for broad consumer spaces, because we're acting in the banking industry, in the finance industry, and maybe to get everyone up to speed of what we actually do. So what we believe is that now I'm just talking about the consumer side. I think what we need to enable consumers is more transparency. Is more is the way of having actually choices to understand what is their individual impact on the environment. Because if I look at today, I might have a car, I have my apartment, my food choices I do, my travel choices I do. Everything I do has a direct impact on the environment. And the problem, however, for us as consumers is to understand what is actually my impact. So how much do I actually harm the environment by now driving with my car to the supermarket, buy groceries, going back and cooking, right? So, and because it's hard to understand, if I look at the brand packaging in the supermarkets, then is that better? Is that the better product, or that, or whatsoever? So we need more transparency to actually understanding where we are, and then making better and more informed choices, basically. And what we have built basically is an algorithm that is utilizing payment transactions. So every kind of purchase I do, and in order to calculate my individual footprint on the environment. Right now, we're focusing on CO2 consumption. So what this means, I basically look at my bank account and I see exactly where do I have most of the impact. Is it through traveling? Is it through my food choices I made? Is it to, I don't know, my living accommodation, et cetera, my energy consumption? And by building these transparencies, consumer getting aware of where they can start to actually act. And sometimes it's really surprising, easy things, because we have something that's called Smart Insights. And what we basically do is we're showing consumers on the basis of their electricity bills. So we see your bank account and we see, all right, this is your electricity provider. And we can basically tell you how much renewable energy that electricity provider is actually using. And we can tell you by switching to someone who's, for example, using 100% sustainable choices, you might save half a ton of CO2 a year. And now becomes the really tricky part. In Germany, we have something called the EEG, which is basically a governmental program which is kind of financing renewable energies. But it also says that all electricity products you have in the market automatically have to label that they have 60% renewable energies in there, which is a completely lie, because they basically use the fundings that they use. This is what we do. This is the money that flows into the market to build up, renewable energies. And on all of, and because we are funding that money anyway in there, all of the products in the market automatically have renewable energies. But you might be working with an energy provider that actually entirely relies on nuclear energy or coal, which is very common, and they still label 60% of it is renewable energies, because they have to, because government funds goes into it. It's completely greenwashing for consumers, and it's actually greenwashed by governments, if you want to say like it's completely the opposite of what they wanted to achieve. So for me as a consumer, I go to my electricity provider and they say, oh yeah, we have 60% of renewable energies, which is most of the times complete nonsense. And this transparency is completely missing. So how do we help consumers to actually understand what's happening in the back end and really understand of what they need to do? So by switching the electricity provider, they might have already a big impact. And yeah, that's what we tackle. And I think these kind of tools is what we need on a broad scale for more consumers to really look behind the scenes a little bit, and understanding of what's their role, basically, and where they can start to act to be more sustainable.
Yes, that's something that I, in the very beginning, wanted to start with in some extent, because we are speaking of the brands, we are speaking of on the other side, but is our society ready to any kind of shift of behavior from the perspective of exactly, are they informed? And specifically, I would say globally, because yes, we have specific societies in Western Europe where clearly the transparency that you mentioned or this information reaches the consumers probably better. But what about the global society? What about this transparency and information towards the consumers across the world?
Well, can I add some thoughts to that?
Please.
I think from a behavioral point of view, what we really need is simplicity. And since the human brain is not geared at all to process a lot of information, we really need to be careful about information, and especially the shape and form in which we give it. Because I completely agree that from a systematic or a systemic point of view, we need transparency. We need to make sure that the partners, the governmental partners, and the whole sort of system is set up to drive sustainable behavior. But when it comes to the consumer guidance, I would be really sad to see more information go out there. And I think what we are facing right now with the pandemic is such a great example, because what we're seeing right now is a global change of behavior. It has happened so rapidly and very effectively. But if we look at the different countries that has been most successful in changing human behavior from one day to another, what they use is visual guides in the moment of shopping, visual feedback in the moment of selecting a specific type of something. They use placement of hand sanitizer to increase the amount of people using hand sanitizer. They use a social norm activation by showing other people wearing masks to get us to wear masks. These are a way of designing our environments in simple visual ways that make it easy for us to adapt our behavior really fast. And of course, the pandemic came with what we call psychologically a clean cut. So it was from one day to another, the whole society changed. And in my perspective, that is what is needed if we want to ensure a sustainable consumption as well. We need to learn from the pandemic and all the great pieces of behavioral design that has helped us change behavior really rapidly. And what is in common around these interventions or solutions is that they're integrated into the moment of choice. It means that they are not based on knowledge. So I don't need a whole manual or a lecture on how to read a yellow line on the floor saying keep distance. I intuitively understand that because it works with the basic human brain. So what we call system one thinking, or the basic human instincts. And that is a simplification of information. And in my perspective, that is what we need. We don't need a lot more information out there. We don't need a whole bunch of reports to read through. No one's going to read it anyway. But we need guides in the moment of choice, in the moment where we're choosing a product in the supermarket, in the moment where we're shopping online, in the moment where we're selecting the energy provider and so forth. We actually created a study in a remote island of Denmark where we looked at 800 households in relation to renewable energy for 3 years. And we measured how we could influence their selection of renewable energy supplier. And what we found was that it was influenced by very simple things like how is the sky outside. They would use that as a visual trigger to choose whether to turn up the heat or turn down the heat or select a specific provider. So what we found was that we would need to be way more visual. We need to be visual and guiding in the moment of choice just before the weekend starts, every Monday morning when we're turning to work. So if we are to help global brands with being successful, they need to understand and learn from the behavior that's going on out there right now. Because all the good solutions are there, but we need to cut down on information. We need to make it so simple to choose the right things, because that's what happened in the pandemic for the countries that was really successful. So I would adopt that definitely.
All right, for the sake of discussion, I'm partially with you, but for the sake of discussion, let me argue against it, because I found it fascinating. But if we follow your path, we will give control back to the brands. And one of the core issues that we have concerning sustainability is that sustainability is not yet a factor in our economic model, right? So I can still be a very successful brand without actually looking for sustainable options. And I can still, come up with information that make me look like a very sustainable brand. And there are some oil companies which have fantastic programs out there, which kudos, really well done. But they're still not sustainable, even if they claim to be sustainable. But consumers are misled by this information or by the way of their brand and position themselves. And I think, and I agree with you, too much information is kind of turns also into the opposite. But I don't think we will have time to leave the topic of sustainability to consumer brands or the companies itself. And the other problem is, I also don't think that politics will change anything in a quick way. So now we are stuck in a situation because ultimately your argument would mean the market will change it and the companies and the brands will change it. I will argue against and saying their interest is primarily their own economics. And as their sustainability is not yet part of the balance sheets, it will not get the attention that it should get. And I think for me at least, I think the only really way of moving things fast around is the market dynamics. And it's only working when we include consumers, because consumers driving the demand and consumers are actually dictating the market moves. And I think we've seen this and I think it was my favorite example is organic food, right? 10 years ago, the first supermarket started with organic foods. I said, meh. The big ones, like, no one needs that. It's garbage. I mean, some hippies that need that food. Right now, it has changed the entire landscape, right? Big brands, discounters, etc., all are going organic. Is this now all organic? Different discussion. But consumer demand has driven this choice. And for me, having more informed consumers, having more power on the market, and they can change the direction of sustainable way faster. So that is at least my opinion on this one. And now I'm really curious how we switch back to yours.
But can I just add one comment?
Please.
Because I completely agree. Of course, it's not that simple. We work within the behavioral niche. But to change and ensure sustainable living, we need to engage governments, consumers, and brands. We can't do without either of them. It's like a three-step thing that goes together hand in hand. But we just have to be aware of that 90% of our decisions are controlled by consumer brands, and they want to follow regulation. So if they are told to ensure sustainable products, they are doing so. But right now, what we see is the struggle that they're actually facing is that they're putting out a lot of products that look super sustainable. And it's not working on the consumer side, because even though consumers are saying, yes, we want sustainable products, they're not selling. And that means that the businesses fall back to old patterns and old habits because they need to maintain a viable business model as well. So if we can help on the consumer side by teaching them how can you actually make sustainable products as attractive as the ones that you have been pushing out for years that are creating this whole problem, then that's what we are going to do. And to me, that's sort of, we need, of course, these three steps, but we are not in government or legislation, and we are not an NGO working with consumers. But what we can do is empower brands that are actually looking to follow regulation and doing a good job on the sustainability agenda to actually be successful on the consumer side as well. But I agree, it's a three-step thing. You cannot just focus on, not giving information and so forth.
No, I agree. We also have all of the, everyone in the puzzle needs to be involved, because of course, if I change my production line and fully be fully compliant and fully sustainable, I might not have a market because my product becomes too expensive, right? Because others not following that example. And it also is a question of pricing. A lot of products that we buy today just simply don't recognize the environmental harms that they do, and that should be actually part of the price. But as soon companies starting pricing that in, they might have no competition anymore because their products become way too expensive. And if a consumer has a choice between two products and maybe it's a cheaper one, I might choose the cheaper one because of my personal circumstances. Not everyone is able to afford real sustainable products yet. So I completely agree. Everyone needs to be sit on the table. But as I said, I'm not arguing against. I'm just doing it for the sake of the discussion.
Well, we actually have in our audience this question linked to what you just said on how to solve this dilemma of making the sustainable products affordable, actually. Because that's one of the big questions that still goes back to the consumer, why we are not choosing the sustainable products.
Yeah, I think that's a very complex question, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of, at least from my perspective, I think there are a lot of things that play a crucial role. So in a perfect world, I would say sustainability should be make products cheaper, if you want to say it like this, because a lot of those things, or the results of climate change, are not yet priced in that product, and they're just it's costs that we are now will face in the future, right? So the simple ones is insurance costs go dramatically up because of weather conditions, and so there is a lot of things that we as consumers will pay in the next years and months, again because our insurance policies goes up. Why is that? Because we don't have agriculture in control, right? We have a huge problem with water around the world. So that causes another issue. So some of the soil, if you're looking at the World Economic Forum, some of the soil is only valid for the next 30 or 50 years. What's happened then? We have no soil that grew any kind of wheat or something in there. So we will have other problems when it comes to that point, but this is a cost that will affect us in 50 years or so. So right now, what we actually need to find is a model that put all of that into one perspective. So our health insurance cost is another thing, right? If we consume too much sugar, if we consume too much, I don't know, plastic, whatever, this is now within our bloods, whatever, do we know the side effects yet? Probably not. Do we know the side effect on sugar? Of course we do. But is there any regulation coming? Not anytime soon, because it's heavily influenced by the industry. But again, these are costs that we already have to pay for through our insurance policies, because more and more people are having diabetes issues and so on and so on. And that's just has a direct effect on sustainability. Not on the sugar side maybe, but there are other examples where it is really a sustainable issue. And I think what we need to do is putting sustainability factors into the company's balance sheets, to making sure, if it's not just the price at the end in euro, pound, or whatever currency you have your balance, it also, there needs to be a factor that respects the environmental impacts that we have, and it either is positive or is a negative one. And if it's a negative one, you have to pay for it. But maybe you are actually doing so good that you have a positive one, and that makes your product maybe cheaper. There are things like carbon exchanges that we can tap into. So there are market mechanics that we can use to actually benefit companies that they're already taking care of the environment versus companies they don't. But again, this needs a political framework, and it needs to be implemented in our society, and needs to happen globally. I mean, a lot of things are happening in the EU. I hope a lot of those things actually is not just, again, a lot of political blah, blah, and things are happening. And that would be a very good step. At least it affects 500 million consumers, and they can have a choice. But please, if you want to say anything.
To me, it's such a complex question. I wouldn't, it's not my area of expertise, so I have no idea how to do that. It would be a whole production, outside of my realm.
But David, you are speaking of more state regulator in this case.
Ultimately, yes. I think we need politic here to set the terms. And yeah, of course, therefore we have politics, right? To build the kind of frameworks that we need to run our economics. Unfortunately, I don't see it yet happening in the sense that we need it. And that's again, and that's why I like things where brand stepping in. That's why I like things where we help consumers to build this awareness, to actually get this understanding, and making more informed choices. And even for me, it's I'm 5 years now into the sustainability topic, and I'm not acting sustainable at all, right? So of course I'm cutting down all my flights, and I'm cutting down my meat consumption and all of that stuff, what I can do. But if I'm invited with friends, that's not happening nowadays that often, to be honest, but if you're invited and they have a good meat or whatever, I wouldn't say no in that perspective. So I have still ways of optimizing my own behavior. And I think always when we build products, always also a little bit of myself. It's hard to adopt change. It's hard to have these behavioral changes really implemented, and so I'm really keen to learn more from Sille, to understand what we can do in order to influence consumers like me to do more, because I know I could do more, but sometimes certain things, like it's life. It's sometimes it's complicated to watch out of sustainable things, or sometimes I'm just too busy to do things, or I have other things in my mind that feel more important than the environment right now. Because obviously,
and I think that's the whole point. Simply because we're not mentally equipped to deal with all these different tasks that we are facing, and especially when it comes to sustainability, because it's not easy. It's very complex to figure out what products to buy, what choices to make. Do I leave the water running? There are so many. We make more than 250 choices every day, and some of them require mental energy, around 10% of them. And around 90% of them, we just make on what we call autopilot or system one thinking, which are our instincts. And so if we want to be really successful with ensuring that transformation, it's not a matter of asking people to think more about sustainability, because we're simply not able to. We don't have the mental capacity available to do that. But it is doing what Tesla did, for example. So Elon Musk has done, in my perspective anyway, has done more for sustainability than any other company in the world, and done it very rapidly. Because what he did was he looked at the existing behavior of people buying cars. And they would normally go for, everybody dreams of having a super cool sports car. And I don't even know what brands are out there because I'm not in that target audience, but a super cool looking car. And the electric cars that was available in the beginning just looked like driving lunch packs and not very sexy at all. So what he did was he used a behavioral principle called framing to reframe the look and feel of a sports car. And if you look at a Tesla car, it does not scream sustainability at all. It hacks into an existing cognitive environment where we just urge to have that car because they look cool, they look sexy, they have all the different cognitive triggers of a super cool sports car. And that's why they have been so successful. And I think in my perspective anyway, it's a matter of figuring out, how do we create a Tesla in every area of our lives? How do we learn from how people choose their food right now and apply those cognitive triggers onto sustainable lifestyles? So the best way of learning is, for example, to look at, when we look at public health, for example, we start out by looking at the cakes, the candies, like all the unhealthy stuff. What are the cognitive triggers that just drives us to having to have that? It can be anything from how the coloring are used, what kind of images are used around it, how they are placed, how the user journey is structured around specific kind of products. And we take those insights and we add it onto vegetables or healthy foods, for example. So to me, it's doing what Tesla has been very successful at doing, learning from all the crap that's going on out there and figuring out, how do we use those drivers onto making the right choice, the easy ones. instead of trying to, you know, ask people to think more about it or to be more analytical. It's only going to last one day, and then we are back to default, and we are going to start, you know, behaving the way we would. I mean, if the meat industry, for example, changed the default setting of a package of meat, they could reduce meat consumption like that, because we don't eat 500 grams of meat. We eat a package of meat. So if they would make them smaller, but seemingly the same size, so create a bit of a visual illusion, they could actually reduce meat consumption really fast. You know, it's, to me, it's figuring out how do we change the right defaults? How do we create the right choice architecture everywhere we go, so that it's not only when we drive a Tesla that we're doing the right thing, but we don't have to waste mental energy on figuring out, is this actually the sustainable food or not? Because that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. And the human brain is too old and too slow to follow that technological development that we've been through. So we need to redesign the environment to work with the human brain rather than expecting more from us.
But do you think we have enough time for this? Because, you know, I completely agree. And but it's probably not going to happen that the meat industry is going to repackage the meat to reduce the actual product. So I assume it's not going to happen.
They are starting to do it.
Sorry?
Some meat industries here in Denmark anyway, or meat companies are doing that. And they're also changing the default of the meat by adding vegetables into the minced meat, for example. That's also part of it.
But again, I mean, they're cutting their own market share, right? So that's something that's most likely not the main driver in that perspective.
No, but they're playing on an existing habits. There are different strategies when we want to change habits and introduce new habits. So introducing a completely new habit is super difficult. It's very effortful from the individual, and it requires intense training. So for example, if we want to teach people never to eat meat, but to learn how to cook all these really nice vegetarian dishes and, you know, read a cookbook every day, that's going to be really hardcore. That's going to require so much effort, so much push, reminders, training before people get it. Or we can build on existing habits, and that's the most effective way of changing human behavior. And if you look at an existing habit, that is people going to a supermarket, they shop for meat. That's normally how we build up our shopping experience. We go for the meat first, and then we go for the vegetables and the dairy products, and then everything around. But we build around a meal consisting of meat. Mm-hmm. So what if we could allow people to keep their existing habits, but just make sure that the defaults are different, so they end up being a little bit more sustainable? That's going to have to be done on so many different everyday choices for this to be successful, but it's a very effortful way or effective way to get people started here and now without requiring more mental energy. Then we can start asking more of them. Then we can start asking them to actually read a cookbook about vegetarian dishes and become full-on vegetarian. But we need to kickstart that behavior. And that's going to require solutions where we don't ask people to think about it and do an extra effort. Yeah. Because we have kids, they go to school. Right now we're homeschooling, you know, fuck the environment. That's never going to happen. I don't have mental energy to do that stuff.
I think it's also a public perception, right? I have a very funny anecdote. In Berlin, we have, in my neighborhood, we have a vegan Thai restaurant. And it's amazing food. But if I tell to my friends, let's go to this vegan Thai restaurant, they say, does it have to be vegan? Right? So this immediately says no. But if I go, I have a really, really nice Thai food. Are you fancying Thai food? Let's go there, right? And at the end of the day, you went out and they say, how do you like it? I say, amazing food. It was really good. I said, did you notice it's actually vegan? Really? And this is, I think, it's kind of one of my favorite things, because people are changing completely their opinion at this point. We're saying, wow, this was amazing food, right? And I didn't actually need it or crave for any kind of meat at this at the evening. Where when I started with this kind of vegan thing at the beginning, it's like, no, it's not going to happen with me. And so I don't know, but I'm with you with changing small habits. But what would you say is a good way in such a situation of, you know, nudging consumer the right way of at least giving it a try.
Well, what you did right there is you changed the framing of the Thai food, and that's all we do.
Right.
So let me give you an example. We were asked by the Danish government to increase healthy choices in some of the rural areas of Denmark. Here, they are not going to choose vegan food ever. That framing would never work. So what they had tried was they tried rolling out these great, beautiful campaigns talking about all these healthy choices and how you've got good to your body to reduce diabetes and da-da-da. But what we learned was what they were going for were the yellow stickers in the products. So that would normally be sort of cakes and candies. They would all have these yellow stickers saying on sale, for example. So we went back and we said, well, you know what we found is the biggest trigger here to drive eating habits when they're shopping is the yellow stickers. So you have to decide, do you want to be politically correct and talk about green stuff? Or do you actually want to make an impact? Luckily, they wanted to make an impact. So we just took the yellow stickers and transferred them on from the cakes onto the vegetables. And we increased sales of vegetables by 45%. So you see, that's a completely different way of framing a message, but we are going for the impact. And that's what you did when you said you want to go for great Thai food, because you left out the vegan trigger, which were not going to work with that group of people. So it's a matter of knowing your target audience and figure out, what's going to trigger their preferences and what preferences are triggering their behavior right now, and how can we transfer that? So it's going to be different solutions. I mean, if you want to increase sales of sustainable products in mid-US, it's going to be completely different solutions. That's going to work in New York, for example, because here people are, in the center of Copenhagen, people can't get enough of vegan and herbal looking stuff. So they make the mistake of thinking that is what everybody else wants as well. So it's a matter of being more humble and actually learning from our surroundings, and just know that we have absolutely no idea of what's going to work. So we have to start investigating the existing habits, the existing environments, and pick the cognitive triggers that work and transfer them further on. So, to me, that's what all companies or governments should be doing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's true, but the question would be how to engage some of the governments into that, because I understand we are speaking of Denmark. There is initiative coming from them for you to go and try to find a solution for that. But how to engage the public sector as a stakeholder in the regions or in the countries where the public sector doesn't have this initiative yet?
That's a tricky bit. That's where you can work with the consumer brands. I mean, of course, we only work when people ask us to work. So, I mean, to me, it has so much awareness at this topic, and more both governments and companies are becoming aware of that. Applied behavioral science is the most effective both business tool, but also tool to reach governmental targets. So luckily, the awareness around this field is growing, and it's becoming way more acknowledged as an active tool to implement regulation. So I would say it's coming. I mean, the market of applied behavioral science has been predicted to become one of the biggest within consultancy in the world. So yeah, it's going to come. I just hope it's going to come faster.
I mean, it's already part of our society, right? But it's not yet really, let's say, sustainable applied. Because if you look at, let's say, all the online advertisement mechanisms that you have, we know your preferences. We know exactly what you look for, where your friends are, what kind of products you buy, most likely even what income you have and the choices you made, and so on and so on. So we could use that and kind of use that knowledge to drive sustainable choices even further. But I think that again
definitely
is against the economic ideas behind the current advertisements that we have, unfortunately.
Well, I'm not completely convinced about that, because a lot of our colleagues work within the EU Commission. They work in different governmental areas where they actually are testing what would happen if we change the algorithm to be set on sustainability of the online consumption platforms, gaming platforms, you know, whatever you have within consumer safety. So, I mean, in my perspective, it is coming more and more, and we have governments all over the world working with applied behavioral science and nudging as a permanent part of their way of implementing regulation. So I'm not, it could move faster, and it's still, so the whole perspective within nudging and behavioral design is it's still very academically based, which is a problem in my perspective. It's not very practically demonstrated yet. So that's where it's actually lacking, but I'm sure it's going to come, and more practitioners are coming.
Well, I think it's actually probably there for most of the countries in terms of the use of behavioral science. The question that I more raise is that are the goals actually sustainable of whatever is government is trying to regulate? That's not there for a lot of regions, and that's still in those regions depends on the public sector and the government. It's true, you're correct. The big brands, they are everywhere. There is no place in the world, I think, where there are none, and that's probably the way in this case.
Yeah, well, so the ambition level of the governments is what is all coming to, basically, if they dare to set the bar high enough.
But we could drive it from a consumer perspective as well, right? So if consumers are more demanding of regulation, then maybe the government will be faster. So it's a chicken egg problem again.
So I hope someone else is doing that.
Yeah.
Changing the consumer request. I'm just making it easy for them to choose the sustainable things.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I think it's tackling the same problem from different perspectives. So yeah, very interesting.
Well, we are coming to the end. There was, I think, one question. Let me just look through our chat. We had one question that we probably didn't discuss exactly. Is from Alet. Sustainability is primarily about behavioral change, but there is a paradox in our behavior, especially when people are motivated to behave more sustainable, because it's difficult and complex in today's society. So people feel stressed. This stress causes opposite behavioral mechanism to kick in. People justify own behavior that is not sustainable. What are your ideas to change that?
Well, it's all about making the right decisions, the easy ones, and making them easy means not giving too much information, not asking for too much reflection, but simply building on existing habits and guiding people throughout the user journey. So through everyday choices, they need the right solutions or the right nudges at the right time. So we need to integrate good solutions into the moment of choice. We cannot rely on information campaigns or, motivation as the main. It's simply not going to work. It's just going to wear us out and create stress if we rely on that only. But we need to make sure that everything in our society is guiding us towards the right choices. And of course, that requires a huge framework behind laying framework where we define what is sustainable products. And I think that's where the effort should be put, so that we absolutely know what products to go for. And I know it's never going to be simple because we have so many parameters within that. But that is what's creating this complexity and making it really hard to create good choice architecture.
I think now you answered it from a brand perspective, which I agree with. Do you have any insights or tips from a consumer perspective? Because what I see is a lot of consumers are, privately involved with it. They want to do more, and they actually want to understand the topics, and they want to act more sustainable. But it is stressful. It is complicated. You don't always have the choices you can make. Do you have any tips from a really consumer perspective on how to tackle this or how to deal with that?
Well, you can always apply insights from behavioral science. I mean, I would definitely use, if you know exactly what products you want to choose and you want to reduce meat, or you first need to set your target behavior. What do I want to be successful with that I'm not being right now? So what targets is that? Is that eating meat only 1 day a week? So it has to be very specific, very concrete. And then I would definitely use what we call intention implementation, where you set up a phone line with your friend. And then every Sunday you call him or her and you say, this week I'm only going to have meat 1 day a week. Right. And I'm only going to wash my clothes once. Right. That could be, you know, for example, specific targets. And then you call back on Friday to report back on how well you're doing. This is a very simple behavioral strategy that is also used to increase the performance of athletes. And if you call a person, you can increase your performance around 70%. So increase the odds of you actually sticking to your plan. But if you report back to, for example, a notebook or a robot, then you increase your odds of being successful by 20, 30%. So it's creating small systems like that for yourself, but making it very concrete and specific is the key here. So saying having meat just 1 day a week, washing my clothes twice. That would be the level of ambition I would set. And then you can, of course, once you have trained yourself to do that over time, you can start adding more things. But it's a matter of finding the really low-hanging fruits to begin with.
So it's about the community, right? It's about the feedback I get from my friends that I value more than my behavior.
Constant feedback mechanisms and reminders to stick on your target. Otherwise, you're going to fail.
All right.
No, that actually really works great. It works great in sports, but it's true that it's a thinking to shift some kind of patterns like this to your consumer behavior as well. That's definitely working advice, I'm pretty sure.
But the reason why I always jump back to brands is because relying on human memory and learning abilities to keep this up is just not very smart. So it's always about creating a system that is not relying on the human brain. Basically.
Right. That's not just really in favor for humans. Okay.
Well, the perspective of society, definitely, I would agree. Well, thank you so much. We just have a few last minutes. If you have anything to add, feel free. It was a great discussion. I hope we will stay in touch and we'll share further ideas, because I'm pretty sure there are quite a lot of new things will be coming up every day, coming days.
Yeah, likewise. Let's put this in practice. So what's your challenge for next year to be more sustainable, Sille?
Mine?
Yes.
Well, I've given up on myself, so it's just tackling more brands.
Right.
Because I don't have the right choice architecture for myself either.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So, but hopefully, maybe that should be my ambition, to set up the right set of choices for myself.
Yeah, it's true. If you're successful, it will become easier. Very good. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. And sorry for challenging you sometimes, but I really was interested in the work you do. So it's better by challenging, it's my way of understanding. So thank you for that.
It was a great discussion and great to meet you both.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all the attendees as well. And we will have a recording that we will share with attendees, and of course you as well.
Thank you so much, Svetlana, for organizing it and also helping you.
Thank you.
Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.